The canyon. Amber light spilled across rust-colored cliffs as the sun dipped low on the horizon. The canyon breathed in silence, vast and indifferent to the drama unfolding on its edge. Calder Mure knelt on a windswept ledge, his body tense as he extended a trembling hand toward the stranded German shepherd just feet away. "Easy, Branic. I'm right here, boy," he whispered, fighting to keep his voice steady. The dog stood frozen on a narrow outcropping, muscles coiled with tension, dark eyes locked with Calder's. One wrong step would send him plummeting into the abyss carved by the Colorado River hundreds of feet below. This wasn't just any dog. Branic had served beside Calder overseas in the kind of places people only see in grainy news reports. They'd been soldiers together, survivors together. The bond between them transcended words, forged in combat, hardened by trauma, sealed by mutual sacrifice. Only moments earlier, a sudden landslide had taken them by surprise. The trail behind them had crumbled without warning, forcing Branic to leap desperately for the outcropping while Calder barely caught the edge of the main ledge. Now they were trapped in a deadly stillness, man and dog suspended between solid ground and oblivion. The red rocks radiated heat from the day's sun, but the air had grown thin and sharp. Calder leaned forward, stretching his arms further than was safe, his boots gripping the uneven stone. The heavy backpack pulled at his shoulders, but he ignored the strain. "You've been through worse than this," he said, almost to himself. "You pulled me out of the rubble in Helmand. Don't you dare give up now." Branic whimpered, shifting his weight forward, one paw testing the space between them, then hesitating. Calder's eyes burned with intensity. He knew this dog's every movement, could read his intentions before they formed. He could almost feel the leap coming when a sound interrupted the moment, a distant mechanical hum that echoed strangely between the canyon walls. Calder didn't move, but his entire body went alert. He remained crouched, arms outstretched toward Branic, while his ears strained to locate the source. The sound wasn't natural, wasn't part of the desert's usual symphony. No aircraft had been reported in the area, no tour groups or rescue patrols. He had checked everything before heading out, seeking solitude in this desolate stretch of the Escalante Plateau. So who was making that noise? Branic, still trembling on the ledge, let out a low, controlled growl, the kind of warning that came from years of combat discipline. His ears stood rigid, eyes shifting focus from Calder to something just past him, up the trail. Every instinct from Calder's years in uniform screamed at him not to turn away from the dog, not to expose his back to potential danger. Instead, he shifted slightly, enough to glance over his shoulder. The canyon behind stretched into layers of red rock and golden haze, empty. Yet the sound persisted, sporadic but deliberate. He turned back to Branic, forcing calm into his voice. "Focus on me, boy. Just me." The rock beneath Branic cracked, barely audible, but both man and dog heard it. The shepherd's body went rigid, weight shifting as the ledge began to crumble beneath him, inch by terrifying inch. Calder's throat tightened. The helplessness was worse than anything he'd felt in combat. At least in war he could run, shoot, fight. Here he could only wait, plead, and hope the dog would trust him enough to make the leap. A gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying dust and heat. The sun slipped quickly behind the western rim, drawing long shadows across the cliffs. Time was running out, not just for Branic but for whatever situation was developing around them. Calder hadn't told anyone he was coming this deep into the plateau. There had been no signal since yesterday morning. No radio, no cell coverage. He hadn't thought he'd need it. But now, with an unknown presence nearby and Branic clinging to a dying ledge, every decision of the past 48 hours weighed on him like armor made of stone. Then came a voice, faint but unmistakable, a dry, distant cry barely carried by the wind. "Help! Help me!" Calder froze. It wasn't Branic, and it wasn't his imagination. Someone else was out there. He looked again toward the ridge where the sound might have originated, but saw nothing but endless stone. Was it a hiker? A lost traveler? Or something else entirely? The mechanical hum returned, sharper this time, more deliberate. Branic growled again, but still didn't move toward Calder. The dog stared into the distance, tail low, ears forward like radar dishes scanning for signals. Calder's blood chilled. He recognized this behavior. Once, in the middle of a village raid overseas, Branic had stopped exactly like this, his entire body going still seconds before an IED detonated nearby. That pause had saved Calder's life. Now, miles from any war zone, the same tension hung between them. The dog wasn't just afraid of falling anymore. He was sensing danger. Something, or someone, was watching them. Calder shifted slightly, rising just enough to scan the narrowing trail behind him. Shadows had deepened, bringing with them an unnatural stillness. No birds, no wind. The hum had stopped, but its absence felt worse somehow. That kind of silence didn't belong here. Another voice called out, closer this time. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Male, weak, fragile. It seemed to come from beyond a bend in the trail, but Calder saw no movement, no figure approaching, just endless stone and the first hints of desert night. He faced Branic again. The ledge beneath the dog creaked audibly, a fracture spidering through the rock. "All right, no more time," Calder whispered. "You jump or you fall." He crouched low again, ignoring the strain in his knees and back, and extended both arms. "Branic, come!" His voice cracked, part command, part plea. The dog didn't move for a beat. Then, with a deep exhale through his nose, Branic stepped back, braced, and lunged. Time seemed to freeze. Calder caught the dog mid-air, the full weight slamming into his chest. He fell backward, crashing onto the hard stone, arms wrapped tightly around Branic's body. Dust billowed around them as the ledge where the dog had stood moments before collapsed into the canyon below with a soft rumble. Calder gasped for air, holding Branic like a lifeline. The dog whimpered softly, but was safe, alive. Calder pressed his forehead against the dog's neck for a moment before sitting up, both of them breathing hard. The last light of day was nearly gone, casting deep purples and reds over the rocks. The strange hum had not returned, but a sense of unease lingered in the air like an invisible mist. "We need to move," Calder said, clipping Branic's harness to his pack and rising unsteadily to his feet. He didn't know what waited beyond the bend in the trail, but something was there. As they turned to continue upward, Branic stopped suddenly, head turning sharply toward the cliff wall. Calder followed his gaze and spotted a dark shape about 30 feet ahead, half hidden behind a natural rock shelf, a human figure slumped against the stone, motionless. Calder approached cautiously, signaling Branic to stay. The dog froze, alert but obedient. As Calder drew closer, the full picture emerged from the gathering darkness. A young man, perhaps mid-20s, lay collapsed in an awkward position. His hiking gear was torn, and blood had soaked through his shirt at the right shoulder, staining the fabric and the dirt beneath him. Kneeling beside him, Calder checked for breath. It was shallow but present. The man's lips were cracked, his face pale beneath layers of sunburn and dust. "Hey," Calder said quietly, tapping his arm. "Can you hear me?" The man stirred faintly, lips twitching. Calder pulled out his canteen and dribbled water into the man's mouth. He coughed weakly, eyes fluttering open, unfocused at first, then blinking hard as he tried to speak. They're still out there," he rasped, voice broken like wind scraping stone. "Who's out there?" "What happened?" Calder leaned closer. The man struggled to lift his hand but couldn't muster the strength. "Two of them. I thought I lost them, but they keep—" He choked, then went silent, eyes rolling back. Calder placed a hand on the man's chest to monitor his breathing. Whoever had been pursuing him, the stranger had run until his body failed him. And they might not be far behind. Behind Calder, Branic growled low, a vibration more felt than heard. Calder turned, hand instinctively reaching for the folding knife at his hip. There was nothing visible on the trail, but the dog remained rigid, nose pointed toward the bend they'd just navigated. Calder felt the familiar sensation he used to experience before ambushes overseas, the subtle shift in air pressure, the way animals behave just before violence erupted. This canyon had eyes now. He was certain of it. He couldn't leave the injured man. Noting that the narrow ledge widened slightly here, Calder dragged the man into a shallow depression and covered him with loose stones and brush for concealment. "Stay here, I'll be back," he muttered, more to reassure himself than the unconscious man. With Branic on a tight leash, Calder moved silently along the ridge, staying low. After about 20 yards, the dog stopped again, staring upward. Following his gaze, Calder caught the unmistakable glint of glass reflecting the last light of dusk, binoculars or a rifle scope, someone watching from elevation. The reflection vanished instantly, but Calder had seen enough. He dropped lower, tugging Branic down beside him. Every combat instinct screamed the same warning. They weren't just being observed. They were being hunted. His mind raced through possibilities. Rangers wouldn't operate this way. No warning, no uniform, no identification. Poachers rarely ventured this deep into protected canyons. He hadn't encountered another human for days, and now, suddenly a wounded stranger appears, pursued by unseen watchers. Too many coincidences. The injured man's words echoed in his mind. They're still out there. Plural. Multiple pursuers, working together. This terrain wouldn't save them. It would trap them. Branic's nose twitched continuously, tracking scents Calder couldn't detect. Darkness was falling rapidly now. Once the sun vanished completely, visibility would drop to almost nothing. They needed to decide quickly, confront whatever lurked in the shadows, or try to disappear into the terrain. Disappearing with a wounded, possibly immobile man seemed impossible. Calder scanned the rock formations above, considering whether to flank and get a visual on their watchers, but that would mean separating from Branic, something he wasn't willing to do after nearly losing him already. He decided to confront whatever waited above, but on his terms. Retreating silently to the injured man, he found the stranger barely conscious, eyes flickering as Calder approached. "You're not safe here," Calder said, voice low. "We're not alone." The man tried to speak but produced only a rasp. After giving him another sip of water, Calder secured his pack and crouched beside him. "I need to know what happened. Who are they?" The man's lips moved. Calder leaned closer, ear just inches away. The words came, disjointed but chilling. They weren't hunting animals. Calder felt those words sink into him like a blade as he stared toward the darkening horizon. The voice hadn't been delirious or panicked. It carried the unmistakable weight of truth. He'd heard that tone before, from civilians trapped in war zones and soldiers cornered behind enemy lines. Whoever lurked in the gathering darkness wasn't hunting game. They were hunting people. Branic suddenly went still, then turned his head toward the southern edge of the canyon. His ears perked up, nose twitching rapidly. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Calder placed his palm against the ground and felt it too. Faint vibrations in the dirt, rhythmic, deliberate. Footsteps, heavy ones, moving up the lower trail behind the rock formations, They were being surrounded. Moving quickly, Calder pulled an emergency tarp from his pack and draped it over the injured man. It wasn't much protection, but it broke up the human silhouette enough to buy them time. Scout mode, Calder whispered to Branic, a command unused since their deployment days. Instantly, the dog's entire demeanor changed. He lowered his head and moved forward, nose to the ground, silent and smooth, exactly as he'd been trained for reconnaissance missions. They followed the ridge quietly, Calder keeping low behind cover, Branic stopping occasionally to test the wind. In the gathering darkness, Calder finally spotted them, three figures in a clearing between stone walls. They weren't talking or moving like lost hikers. They stood with military precision, coordinated and silent. One held what appeared to be a makeshift spear, another had binoculars hanging from his neck. The third held a camera. Calder's stomach turned. These weren't rangers or hunters. Their clothes were worn but functional, their stances tactical, their silence practiced. He'd encountered similar groups before, smugglers, mercenaries, off-grid operators who moved through remote areas undetected. But this was different. The presence of the camera suggested something more sinister. They weren't just pursuing, they were documenting. When Calder returned to the injured man, he found Branic lying beside him, body tense, watching the darkness. "They're not out here by accident," Calder whispered, "and neither are we." Before he could elaborate, a sharp crack echoed through the canyon, a gunshot, clean and deliberate, rolling between the stone walls like artificial thunder. Calder dropped to the ground, pulling Branic down with him. He scanned frantically for the source but saw no impact nearby. The shot hadn't been aimed at them directly, more a warning or a signal. Crawling back to the injured man, Calder found him still unconscious, unaware of the danger. The tarp covering him fluttered slightly in the breeze. The mysterious figures had vanished, melting into the rock formations like ghosts. That worried Calder more than their presence. People like this didn't retreat. They repositioned. His options were limited. Waiting out the night seemed naive. Carrying the wounded man over exposed terrain would make them perfect targets. And he had no idea how many pursuers were out there. He'd seen 3, but experience told him there would be more, coordinated, communicating, closing a trap around them. Branic pressed his body low to the ground, head turning toward the eastern edge of the canyon. Far off, something flickered once. A light signal or camera flash. A horrible realization dawned on Calder. Years ago in Helmand Province, he'd heard disturbing rumors about missing locals found months later, victims of rogue filmmakers who documented suffering for underground networks. The idea had sickened him then. Now it felt terrifyingly immediate. Was this some twisted form of human hunting? Not just pursuit, but performance? Were they unwilling participants in some dark entertainment happening beyond law and civilization? "No more waiting," Calder muttered. "We move now." He hoisted the wounded man into a fireman's carry, groaning under the weight, and motioned for Branic to lead. The dog sprinted ahead, tail low, body hugging the contours of the trail. Calder followed, each step burning through his thighs, the canyon darkening around them like a closing mouth. The moon provided barely enough light to navigate the narrow trail. Branic moved with certainty, instincts sharper than any technology. Calder pushed forward, the wounded man heavy across his shoulders, every muscle screaming in protest. He could sense eyes watching from somewhere in the darkness, the psychological warfare of being observed without seeing his observers war at his resolve. The trail curved sharply through a narrow cut in the stone. As Calder ducked to pass through, Branic stopped ahead and growled softly, a warning, not alarm. The dog sniffed the air, then veered suddenly off the main trail into a hidden alcove in the rock wall. Calder followed, collapsing to his knees once inside. He laid the man down and checked his pulse, weak but present. Branic paced the edge of the alcove, alert but not panicked. Leaning back against the cold stone, Calder tried to clear his head. The air felt thick with tension, almost suffocating in its stillness. The wounded man stirred, eyes opening with surprising clarity. Calder leaned forward immediately. "Talk to me. Who are they?" The man coughed, grimaced, then whispered, "They're filming everything. A hunt for profit. They call it clean extraction. Off-grid captures for private buyers. No records, no evidence." Calder felt his blood run cold. The camera, the coordination, the silence. It all made terrible sense now. "I escaped from one of their sites," the man continued. "I was part of a test group. They said if we made it out, we were free." He laughed bitterly. "No one ever makes it out." Before Calder could respond, Branic froze, body low to the ground, eyes locked on the entrance. Footsteps approached, measured, confident, unhurried. Calder pressed against the canyon wall, one hand on his knife, the other steadying Branic. Through the darkness, he could just make out the silhouette of boots stepping carefully over gravel. They moved with the assurance of someone who believed they controlled the situation. A figure appeared at the entrance, medium build, wearing a tactical vest without insignia. He moved like military, but lacked the discipline. This was something else, something predatory. The man raised a device to his mouth and whispered into it. Though Calder couldn't make out the words, the tone was calm and coordinated. There was no more time for hiding. Calder surged forward from the shadows, knife drawn. The man froze for a crucial second, just long enough. Branic launched with explosive force, teeth finding the attacker's forearm as Calder closed the distance. The man screamed and swung wildly, but the dog held firm. Calder drove the attacker against the stone wall and placed the blade with precision, a clean strike born from brutal necessity. The man slumped to the ground. Branic released his grip and backed away, still alert for other threats. Calder crouched and retrieved the radio device from the man's vest. He clicked it on. Static crackled, then a female voice emerged. "Unit 3, status." The voice was professional, cold. Calder didn't respond verbally. Instead, he clicked the transmission button twice, a signal that might buy them precious minutes. Turning back to the wounded man, Calder grabbed him by the shirt. "We're leaving," he growled. With Branic leading, they ascended a narrow slope strewn with loose rock. Calder dragged the man behind him, pushing beyond exhaustion. Behind them, shouts erupted. They'd found the body. They were coming. Cresting the ridge, Calder spotted a faint reflection ahead, moonlight glinting off metal. A structure rose from the stone like an apparition, an abandoned ranger tower he didn't remember seeing on any map. Whether it was supposed to be there or not, it offered shelter and defensible position. Lungs burning, legs trembling, Calder pressed on. Branic reached the tower first, barking once, sharp and urgent. Calder forced the door open, revealing darkness, dust, and broken equipment inside. It wasn't much, but it had walls and a door they could barricade. He dragged the injured man inside, slammed the door shut, and dropped a metal bar across it. Outside, multiple footsteps circled. They had been found. Crouching beside the barely conscious man, Calder held still, listening to the movement outside. Shadows passed the cracks in the door. Branic stood rigid, muscles coiled, ears forward, a guardian statue in the darkness. Calder knew what was coming. These weren't people who negotiated. They weren't people who showed mercy. They would come in fast and confident, expecting to overwhelm them. He pulled an emergency beacon from his pocket, thumb hovering over the activation switch. One press might summon help, if anyone was listening. He pressed it. A red light blinked slowly in the darkness. Scanning the room, he found little to work with: a broken chair, splintered wood, empty shelves, no weapons beyond his knife, no cover except the thin walls. "Stay with him," Calder told Branic quietly. "Protect." The dog understood, positioning himself beside the wounded man. The connection between them needed no translation. Kneeling one last time by the stranger, Calder whispered, "When I move, you crawl. Don't stop. Got it?" The man nodded weakly. Standing, Calder clenched his hands. He knew exactly how this would end, but he would make it count. The door shuddered from the first impact. Branic growled, low and warning. The second hit cracked the frame. Calder moved to block the entrance. When the door burst inward, he lunged at the first figure, tackling him backward. Branic launched toward a second attacker. The small space erupted in chaos. Shouts, impacts, bodies colliding in desperate combat. Minutes compressed into seconds, adrenaline stretching each moment into painful clarity. When silence finally fell, Calder lay motionless on the floor, eyes open but unseeing. Branic, wounded but standing, positioned himself protectively over the injured man who had crawled into the corner, still alive. In the distance, a mechanical thrum grew louder, the sound of rotor blades cutting through desert air. The emergency beacon's signal had reached someone. Help was coming. But it was too late for Calder. He had held the line long enough, paid the final price to protect a stranger and the dog who had been his faithful companion through war and peace. As life faded from him, his last thought wasn't of failure or regret, but of certainty. Even here, in the furthest reaches of nowhere, hunted and outnumbered, he had proven that not everyone runs. Some stay, some fight, some stand against darkness, whatever the cost. Days later, a military helicopter lifted off from the canyon rim, carrying a wounded German shepherd and a young man with the haunted eyes. Below them, a small team worked methodically, documenting evidence from an extensive underground facility carved into the remote canyon system, a facility where wealthy clients had paid to watch humans hunted for sport. The discovery would make international headlines, exposing networks of human trafficking and private hunting operations that had operated undetected for years. But none of the reports would fully capture what had happened that night in a broken-down ranger tower when one man and his dog made their final stand. In the helicopter, Branic rested his head on the rescued man's lap, eyes fixed on the canyon falling away beneath them. The man stroked the dog's fur gently, tears streaming down his face. "He saved us," he whispered. "He saved us all." The canyon grew smaller below them, its shadows unable to hide its secrets any longer. The red rocks gleamed in the morning sun, ancient, eternal witnesses to humanity's capacity for both cruelty and courage. And somewhere among those stone sentinels, the spirit of a soldier remained, watching over the wilderness he had given everything to protect.